Hello, welcome. My name is Katie Asmus, and I am here with you from Boulder, Colorado in the US. And I am in this moment on the unceded territory of the original people, the Cheyenne, the Ute, and the Arapaho on this land. And today I'm going to be talking about incorporating nature-based ceremony into therapy for resource for healing trauma, as well as working with clients to acknowledge and support them through rites of passage. So in this presentation, we will look at an overview of nature-based therapy, what that even means, look at ceremony and the roles that these can play in supporting clients through life transition, as well as healing trauma. I'll also be discussing what do I even mean when I'm talking about resourcing and what is rites of passage and why are these both important to understand in our healing work. We'll also look at the role of incorporating ceremony into therapy, as well as the significance of utilizing ceremony to mark life transitions and how that's even different and or similar to working with it around healing trauma. I'll also be giving you some very practical ideas and examples of ways to incorporate all of this into your work with clients. And I'm going to be going back and forth between kind of speaking to you on the full screen and sharing some slides. So you'll get to have a little visuals for those visual learners like myself. So again, my name's Katie Asmus. I'm a body-centered and nature-based psychotherapist, coach, educator, rites of passage guide, trainer, and consultant in these arenas. I'm also the founder of the Somatic Wilderness Therapy Institute, which is based in Boulder, Colorado, but we offer programs and trainings online and in person around the world. So I work both indoors and outdoors with people, incorporating nature, incorporating the body-mind connection in the work that I do. And I have been, I say, collaborating with the natural world in my work with people for about 30 years at this point. And really my biggest passions are my love of people, my love of the natural world, and continued healing, growth, and learning. And so I incorporate all of these pieces in many different ways in the work that I do. I've also taught graduate students at several universities in the US, in particular students studying counseling in somatic psychotherapy, in wilderness therapy, adventure therapy, eco-psychology, primarily at Naropa University in Boulder and Prescott College in Arizona. And I want to acknowledge that as I'm presenting this material to you today, this may be obvious as I've shared a little bit about my background, but I want to acknowledge that what I'm sharing is really coming from my training and perspective, being born, growing up in the US as a third generation European American and having traditional education, as well as a lot of my own experience and influenced by the fields of outdoor education, really bringing many pieces together. But as I speak about this topic, just to acknowledge there's so many different perspectives in the world. I am the US representative for the International Adventure Therapy community. And so I do have a lot of dialogue with people around the world who are incorporating nature into their work with others and adventure work. So I do have some perspective of what's happening in other countries. But I'm really going to speak to you today, as I said, about this really specific area of practice of incorporating ceremony into your work with people. And personally, this is a big part of my work. And I often say, I do and help teach people how to create personally meaningful, culturally relevant ceremonies and rites of passage. And so what that means is really looking at this from a big perspective. I'm not coming from any particular spiritual or religious practice, but what I get excited about is how to, for each one of us, connect with what actually has meaning for us. How do we connect with meaning? How do we connect with our intention? And how do we help the people that we're working with do that as well, so that it is relevant to what's happening now in their lives versus something that they read in a book or something that they saw in another culture. And so I want to have us keep that in mind as we're talking about this today. So I want to start with, what is nature-based therapy? And this is a big part of this whole conference that you are calling in for, and in conjunction with. So depending on where you look and who you talk to, you may get different definitions, but the definition that I use is simply the conscious incorporation of the natural world into the therapeutic process. So I'll say that again: the conscious incorporation of the natural world into the therapeutic process, which is very general. One, because I intentionally use the word therapeutic process, which it may be in therapy and clinical setting, or it may not be. And different cultures, different countries hold therapy differently. So I want to acknowledge and honor that. Also, the conscious incorporation of the natural world, so that we're doing it purposely. And there are many, many different ways that we can do that. I'm going to speak to that in a moment. But I'd also like to say, when you're looking at the literature or looking more into this field of study, there are different terms that are used that the words are very different. The meanings of these words are very different, but the fields in which they are practiced are very overlapping. So I just want to bring those in and name those here. So one is the term wilderness therapy. And that's a big term that's been used in the US for years, especially in regard to programs with what we call youth at risk, or people who are working with addiction, where they might go out for a month or 2 months and carry their food and their sleeping materials and everything on their backs, learn to make bow drill fires. Wilderness therapy also has a much broader connotation than that. I teach wilderness therapy students, and we really look at, in that program, also this definition: the conscious incorporation of the natural world into the therapeutic process. But again, I just want to name, that's one term that's used. Another one is adventure therapy. And I spoke to being the US representative of the International Adventure Therapy community. And that's a term, adventure, right? That connotates action and doing and incorporating the challenge as part of the therapeutic process. The way that the field's evolved, it's evolved very much in conjunction with nature, with the wilderness, with being outside. And so sometimes those terms are used interchangeably, sometimes not, even though the terms are very different. And then the third one I want to share in this moment, the third term, is ecotherapy. And that comes out of the field of eco-psychology, which is really more a theory looking at the interconnection of humans in the natural world, or the other than human natural world, because we are also part of the natural world, and really looking at and acknowledging the fact that the health of us as humans is inextricably connected to the health of the earth and our relationship with it. And then ecotherapy is a practice that really comes from that theory. So it really brings into play the importance of our relationship with the natural world, spending time in nature, even potentially spending time witnessing destruction in nature, spending time helping heal nature, and also looking at how that impacts our own identity, how that impacts our own health, etc. So all of this is a really big field. There's tons of research, writings, books, how-tos out there if you're interested. And hopefully you're getting some tastes here today and at this conference so you can follow the threads that interest you. But that's the big picture of what I'm going to be speaking about is held within. So, some examples of nature based interventions here. Let me screen share again with you. So, let's see. So, some examples of nature based therapy applications. There are so many, like I said. So, one is, like I shared, the backcountry youth at risk or addiction programs. Another one would be adventure experiences that involve risk. So this could be used in those backcountry experiences. They are sometimes used in the US in community clinics where people go out for a day, or they might be in day treatment and then go out on trips. And so that could involve anything that requires action, risk, challenge. Some of the common ones are backpacking, rock climbing, canoeing, all sorts of adventure activities. And with those experiences, the experience themselves is themselves are part of the therapy. And then we also look for the metaphor. How did we show up? What were the thoughts that we were having? What did we do when there was challenge? And ultimately, how does that relate to how we deal with the rest of the world? So another area of nature-based therapy is horticulture therapy, and that is really incorporating plants and our relationship with planting them and cultivating them and harvesting them. And again, this goes back to the ecotherapy piece. What do we learn? How does health get cultivated through our relationship with plants and that process? And then equine or animal assisted therapy, obviously another big part of this particular conference, and looking at the way in which our relationships with animals, and again, the experience of that really teaches us so much about ourselves and our relationships, and just wild with metaphor there. And then another area, ceremony, rites of passage, and wilderness quest work. So there's a big community out of the US who I know are teaching globally now, the School of Lost Borders. And they're just one of many programs who they back in the 1970s looked at cultures around time and the different rites of passage programs, not even programs, right? Rites of passage ceremonies that they did often, and in particular with their youth, when the youth were becoming adults, and looked at the way in which many cultures incorporated a going out onto the land, going out kind of into the desert or into the wild to survive or be with oneself for a while to really get in touch with one's own strengths, gifts, capacities, etc. And they created a 4-day, 4-night solo with a fast experience, incorporating preparation and integration. And many organizations follow something similar to that around the world at this point. But that is a whole body of work that I also am very passionate about and is influencing this workshop today. So another example is connection with the natural world through, and these are really particular practices that I like to use, sensory awareness. And so our experience of opening up our senses that helps us to be more in our bodies, bring in mindfulness, really impacts our nervous systems. There's a lot of different interventions in that way. Wandering on the land. So allowing yourself to move through the space, potentially see what you're drawn to, be in relationship to the elements, um, be in the world in a different way. Often there's something about the unfamiliar that comes in also when we're out in the natural world, and free floating attention. There's so many aspects here that are therapeutic. And then finally in this list, I share conversations with the natural world. And that is when we go out and sit with a natural being, I like to call it, and see what it has to share with us. And sometimes asking it even a question out loud or in our mind. What can you tell me about death? Or what can you tell me about balance? And seeing what shows up. And for some people, the answers come in words and sometimes images or felt sense. So these are just some of the many ways um, nature based therapy is being applied. And here are some images. There's a woman in nature meditating, bringing in the mindfulness, the sensory awareness. Up in the right hand corner, there's a group, maybe even doing a group challenge together out in the natural world, having connection and maybe even problem solving or just fun. Fun is also very, very therapeutic. And then down in the bottom, we have some horticulture therapy, being in relationship with the earth and the land and that which is growing here. And a few more pictures. So during this time, especially over the past many months, since COVID's been happening and we have been more uh, not having relationship in person or with distancing, my colleagues and I have gotten really creative and looking at how do we continue to incorporate the wisdom, the support, the beauty of the natural world in the therapeutic process while we have these different circumstances and constraints. So here's some images of that. One is obviously the people in person, and I have done some in-person work with really getting thoughtful about protocol. That picture is not from one of my groups this summer. I had people distancing in person. Um, but if you see the photo below that of looking out the window, I've done a lot of work with training practitioners who are in New York City or Chicago or Spain, and in those moments couldn't leave their house. And so the sensory awareness and the nature-based exercises that I did with them over the computer, over Zoom, I had them look out their window and be in relationship with the natural world out the window, and or find the beings in their home that were alive, or even find the images of the natural world. We did scavenger hunts on what I called who is here, who is in your space, what are the other beings that are alive or the images. And we did a lot of different exercises in relationship to the nature beings while being inside. So again, the picture of the person here on the computer who is also has, you can see her, the window reflections of nature outside. So a little plug to get creative around all the different ways that we can incorporate nature. Also, I'll just show you, I have some of my nature ceremony items right here that is in the space I work so that I can also connect with them myself and or with my clients at any moment. Okay. So today, in particular, I'm going to hone in on one aspect of nature-based practice, like I said, which is incorporating ceremony into the therapeutic work. And so in the title, I talked about ceremony for resource as one of the aspects of incorporating ceremony. So I want to start with what is resourcing and what do I mean when I use that word? So let's see. Okay. So what is resourcing? And this term and my use of it is very influenced by Peter Levine and the work of somatic experiencing. And that's a body of work that really works with somatic trauma work, acknowledging the wisdom of our body minds in the process that impacts if we experience trauma, from a scary experience or not. And when we're working with health, when we're working with healing, especially when we're working with healing from trauma, essentially we need enough safety in our bodies, enough safety in the room in order to process, in order to feel our feelings, in order to have the tears that we couldn't have at the time, or let our bodies shake in the way that they didn't get to shake when things were scary. And so, resource is something that helps us to feel more safe and calm. So, we'll just look at the slide here for a moment. So, resourcing essentially is coming into a state of greater connectedness, presence, good, neutral, safety, or ease. So, essentially, anything better, and typically either neutral or good, right? So, for some of us, we might feel like joy is resourcing, and for others, just better is resourcing. So, again, coming into a state of greater connectedness, presence, good, neutral, safety, or ease. Because when we feel good or okay or better, essentially unconsciously or implicitly, it registers a sense of safety to our whole being, which then allows us to begin to process what we couldn't process during trauma when something was really scary. So, resourcing, it's coming into the present. And this helps part of the brain that doesn't know the event is over catch up to the here and now. So, when we have experienced trauma, part of us gets kind of stuck in the experience, and so the more we can bring those parts of our brain, really our unconscious, even more than our conscious brain, on board and say, okay, where am I now? Is there anything around me scary or dangerous now? No. Okay, check that out. So as I come into the present moment more and more, again, it registers more safety to my whole body, mind. I would even say body, mind, spirit. And then processing can start happening all by itself. So ultimately, resourcing is finding safe ways to come into felt sense awareness, also neuroception, our experience of our felt sense awareness from the inside out of our sensations. So, learning how to tolerate, actually being able to tolerate being in our own bodies, being in our own sensations in a way that feels okay, so that we can process the trauma that we've been through. Okay, so examples of resources and ways of resourcing. So, resources are anything, like I said, that help us to feel calm, neutral, better, etc. And I talk a lot about the resourcing as the building blocks of therapy. Because if we don't feel safe enough in our bodies to go into what feels bad, then our systems are just going to get activated and not really have the memory or the experience of regulation, of coming back to calm. So when we practice resourcing, we're helping the body mind remember, oh, this is what it feels like to exhale. This is what it feels like to feel a little bit calmer. It also starts to groove the neural pathways to make this more and more and more accessible. And there's so many ways to resource. So as I just described what that is, I think about really simply, I think about internal resources, external resources, and spiritual resources. Or actually, I often say spiritual or transpersonal, because spiritual, often people think about religion, which it might be, or it might be being in nature, or I say connecting with music or having a good conversation, something that helps us feel connected to something greater. So we can think about what are the things inside of us that are resources, my own, my humor, or my will, or my compassion. Those might be things that help me get through and help me um, also stay sane, stay connected in my life when things are hard. There's external resources. We often think about people, places, or things, those things that again, make us happy, bring us more ease, comfort. Could be the smell of warm bread baking. It could be a human in our life that we feel supported by. It could be our kitty that likes to crawl on our lap and brings a sense of ease. It could be being at the ocean or being outside, or even imagining that, remembering that can start to impact our neurophysiology. And so, because this is such a big part of the work I do, incorporating resourcing, it's also important to recognize that nature, in and of itself, can be a huge resource. And I want to acknowledge that the natural world, being outside in the natural world and or connection with the natural world is not necessarily initially a resource for everyone. I've worked with some people who lived in a big city who were terrified to be outside, and they said, I know what to do if something jumps out from, behind the dumpster in my city. I know what to do, but I actually don't know what to do if a mountain lion or a bear or something comes out of nowhere, and that's terrifying to me. I've also had a client who had a, several clients who have had traumatic experiences in different ways out in nature, and impacted it as a resource for them, and they needed to kind of work the trauma to get back to connecting with nature as a resource. So I want to just acknowledge it is not a resource for everyone, but for many people it is. And part of that is because just being out in the open air is good for our bodies and our minds. And when we spend time outdoors, especially in a wooded area or a kind of or water or more nature surrounded area, it impacts our brain waves. It impacts our nervous systems. And there are many studies, especially I know of ones in Japan and in connection with the forest bathing um, practices. So much happens just even on an unconscious level, let alone a conscious level, when we notice ourselves being pleased or curious or drawn to different aspects with our senses in the natural world. So, that said, in this presentation, again, I'm focusing primarily on ceremony, and really ceremony as a resource to support life transition and trauma. And I use those, hold those differently. Sometimes they're interwoven. A traumatic experience typically does create a big life change. And then there are other life changes that we go through, which are choiceful. I'm going to say more about that in a few moments. However, let's share my screen with you again here. So, what is ceremony? When I get on the same page here with what am I talking about with these terms, ceremony and rite of passage? So, again, very generally, I hold ceremony as an action. Can I move this? An action or intentional set of actions to mark a particular intention or transition. So, again, simple, but we bring our attention and intention to something and focus it there in honor of a bigger intention. And when we take that time to do that, I think of it as like we're planting seeds. When we plant the seeds, we put a life in motion. When we put our energy into this life, something begins to happen that takes on a life of its own. And of course, the more that we tend to those seeds and consciously water them, the more they may bloom or grow. However, if they're outside, depending on the climate and the seeds, and they might thrive just in the rain and the sun or the shade wherever they are. So I think about ceremony as that, it's like bringing our energy, planting the seeds. And then rite of passage. So this is a term coined by a European anthropologist, Arnold van Gennep, back in the early 1900s. And essentially, he looked at cultures across time and discovered that many cultures created ceremonies, had ceremonies, celebrations, honorings, markings of different life transitions. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. And so the rite is essentially the ceremony. It is the ceremony that marks the life transition or change in an aspect of one's identity. So, let's see, what else do I want to say that about this moment? So, with rite of passage, again, the term was originally coined as the marking, the ceremony of the transition. And when we look at that these days, the term is used more broadly. And sometimes it's used to acknowledge a period of time. I went through a rite of passage. That this graduate program was a rite of passage. There were so many struggles along the way. Many cultures would send their young people out to become an adult by going out onto the land for several weeks and surviving. That was the rite of passage. So the rite of passage might be one single, you know, hour-long ceremony or 10-minute ceremony, could be the rite of passage, or the rite of passage, the rite might be the of passage, might be a year, might be many years. So I want to also hold this term broadly along with looking at its origins. So with life transitions, few pieces I want to really acknowledge as we're looking at this and as it relates to creating ceremony to support life transition. So again, looking at life transition, both from a place of, actually, let's look at it from many different ways of coming to the life transition. So one could be that it's developmental, again, going from childhood to adulthood, or childhood to adolescence, adolescence to adulthood, or death would be a rite of passage or a life transition, both a life transition. So one way the transition happens is just developmentally. This is what's happening. Another way that that can happen is through choice. So we say, oh, I want to, I want to get a new job. I think I want to get a new career. I feel inspired by this thing. So we might choose life transition, or I want to move to another country and change this really big aspect of my whole life. Another way that life transition can come along is not by choice. So again, getting fired from a job, or getting what else might just be, oh, this is the end. This is the end of my program or my project, and okay, what am I going to do now? That might be also along the developmental lines. But and with the not having choice, this is an area also where trauma comes in, where something happens to us, typically suddenly out of the blue, whether that's a car accident or an assault or something that happens that is very impactful, very scary, very detrimental, and typically impacts our beliefs about ourselves or the world. And that is not something typically that we have chosen, or would have ever chosen, or would know what happened. So again, looking at many different ways that transition happens to us. With that consideration, what I want to say and highlight is that with all transitions comes loss. I want to say that again. With all transitions come loss. So sometimes the loss is welcome again, and sometimes we grieve that, and sometimes we have, again, both choice and excitement as well as loss. And the thing is, in the world that I live in over here in the US, we don't do a great job, I would say. I mean, this is a broad statement whenever I'm talking about, a culture, but we don't do a great job of acknowledging endings. And I think this is part of the culture these days. It's like, okay, on to the new, on to the next, on to the bigger thing. And it hasn't been normalized that there's also loss, that there's also an ending. And I wasn't really taught to honor that or look at that in my life. It's something that I learned over time as I really began working with life transition therapeutically and rites of passage. So, one example is a friend of mine got a job promotion and was really excited and stepped into this role. And after a few months, several months, was really feeling more stressed and more depressed. And we had a conversation about it. And he said, I have way more responsibility. I have less time with my family. I'm not sleeping as much. And all the people that have been working with all these years, now I'm their boss. So there's this weird relationship thing happening. And he said, I had no idea that this was actually what was going to happen. I was just excited to be a leader and give back and make more money and have a different role. And wow, there are a lot of things that I didn't consider the impact of this. So, just one example. I'm also thinking I recently did a ceremony for someone who graduated um, from college, and they were relieved to graduate, excited, what's next. And at the same time, they said, I'm going to miss my friends. I'm going to miss being, having access to my community outside my door at any moment. There's a lot of pieces that even though I'm so happy to be done with the deadlines and the papers, there's something about this life that I'm leaving that I'm really going to miss. So, loss with everything. So, it's with whether it's choiceful or not, it's really, really helpful to acknowledge the loss, acknowledge the ending. And that's one of the things that ceremony can really support. So, of course, if the transition that we've gone through was traumatic, then, there wasn't a choice. There's typically even a greater need to do some sort of conscious letting go, conscious grieving, acknowledgement of what we've lost, of the choice we didn't have. I do want to say, as we're creating ceremony, it's really important to do it in the right timing, the right timing. So part of this is just feeling into it, having conversation with yourself and or with your clients about what is true now? What is true right now? What are we marking? What's it time to mark now? So with all transitions, there are 3 stages that we identify with a transition and through a rite of passage lens. So and you may recognize these words if you've worked in rites of passage. 3 aspects of the transition: severance. So that's the ending or the letting go of the old way. Again, whether sometimes that's choiceful, sometimes that's not. We've severed from the way things used to be to some degree or in some aspect of our life. And then the second stage is the liminal, or the in between, or I've heard it called, I love this, the no name stage. And so this is the time where we're not who we were before. Our life isn't what it was before, but it's not quite what it's going to be. And so it's typically very uncomfortable. For some people, it's exciting because the world is now our palette, our empty canvas. Um, but for others, and again, given depending on the circumstances, it can be terrifying and uncomfortable and like, oh, what do I do now? And what am I supposed to feel? And how do I move forward when I'm not inspired or I don't know what I want to do next? So this is a complex stage. And then the last one is incorporation, or bringing it into our bodies, bringing it into our life, living the new way, which can be many years of this phase of, as we start a new job. Typically for me, it takes like a year or so to really know what I'm doing and not have to ask a bunch of questions and know where the pens are and know who to go to for what and all the many details, right? So incorporation can take a while, or becoming an adult. Obviously, there are many different iterations of what that means. It's also the time in which we begin to give our gifts away from what we learned or what we kind of took from the past. It's a time of giving to community. So this can show up in many different ways. Severance liminal incorporation, as I talk about, describe this in our lives, we can be in these different stages in different aspects of our lives. So I might be in the incorporation phase of my work life, integrating all the things that I've been doing for the last 30 years. Whereas I might be in another stage in my relationship, or in another stage in my home, or if I decide, oh, I want to begin um, learning a new practice, and I go to the dojo. I would be in the liminal. I would be like, I don't know what I'm doing here, and this is really scary. So there can be different aspects of our life where we're in these different phases, and I tend to think about what is the center of gravity. What's the center of gravity of our life at this moment? And often that's where our attention is, as at our center of gravity. It's just like, what's coming to the surface? Where is our attention going? And often these are the bigger things that are happening. And those are the things that we often consider marking. Okay, so some common life transitions and that cultures often mark, and I know I've been naming some of these already. Birth, right? Either giving birth, often there are ceremonies for people who are doing that, and or welcoming the new being into the world, depending on your culture, blessing way, baptism, different different cultures and religions do different things. Coming of age ceremony. So again, the becoming an adult or becoming an adolescent, and there are many quinceanera, um, bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah, different practices in this way. Graduation from important years of schooling is something many cultures, including the US, celebrate. Marriage or commitment ceremony, a way to mark we are committing to each other, we're coming together. With that, there's a loss of singlehood, and there a loss of really, making decisions for me, or for the way what is best for me and how I want to live. Obviously we're all different in how what that means to us, but I do a lot of marriage and commitment ceremonies with couples, and I often ask them to do ceremony for themselves around letting go of their experience, what it meant for them to be single and not in a committed partnership, as before they go and do the committed partnership ceremony. Another one that is a common one that cultures mark is death. Different ways of honoring, acknowledging, grieving, celebrating when someone's life on the physical plane ends. So, some examples just to sort of get your creativity going. Additional transitions I've assisted clients in marking or creating ceremony for. So, I had a client say, who is an adult and stepping into her professionalism, say, I want to let go of my identity as a party girl, and I want to step into a contributing adult member of society that is making more responsible choices for myself, for my own body, for my health, and for my community. So we did a ceremony on that. I've also done many different ceremonies for people around welcoming in their child. So energetically welcoming, calling in their child, the spirit of their child. Also right before they were born, finding how can we let this child know we're ready and we love them and there are people around and they can come, and or creating physical space to welcome the being. So many ways to honor that transition. I supported someone in doing a ceremony and stepping into the question of whether or not they wanted to get married. So it wasn't even about stepping into marriage or letting go. It was, do I even want this? Stepping into being in the question, which would be an example of a liminal stage ceremony, being in the unknown, being in the question consciously. Another one that I've done a lot with people, it's one of my favorites, is supporting people to write marriage or commitment vows to themselves. So, what is it that I commit to myself that I will do or I will not do, or I will hold sacred? And it's something that anyone can do at any time. And it helps anchor in, what is it that is non-negotiable to me? How am I going to treat myself? And for people in partnership, also looking at, right, and what are the things that are non-compromisable in my experience as I create life with or share life with another. So some examples of ceremonies that could support people from healing from trauma, which is a little different than the ones that I was just sharing about life transition. So, a grieving ceremony for loss of a loved one. And not all deaths are traumatic, but sometimes they are, just because of our experience of not having this person in our lives anymore. It impacts often our identity, and or if the way that the person died was traumatic or sudden or gruesome or just challenging in any way, there may be even more than one ceremony that one does in support of the letting go, which also includes honoring, loving, acknowledging what has been good, acknowledging what is being missed, as well as the letting go of what isn't going to happen in the future. Another experience might be a return from illness to health. And that could be mental or physical illness. I've done ceremonies for both. I'm going to give you a more full example of that in a bit. And then honoring life change due to COVID. So I did a ceremony with someone I supervised recently who said, I am stepping out of my beloved career that I love as a therapist because my children need me at home and need me to homeschool them right now. And I'm the one to do this, and this would not be my choice. And so, did a ceremony with the letting go, the grieving, and then also opening up to the possibility and setting intentions for this time that could also be special and unique. So it was really powerful, and we did it spontaneously. So another one might be a ceremony marking, who am I now after the loss of something that I didn't expect. And this is something that comes typically later. So I know I talked about the loss of a loved one, but that could be the loss of a significant job or role in life that kind of came suddenly and brought on shock, left us in a state of confusion. Who am I now? And sort of doing a ceremony around that question, around the who am I now, support for being in the liminal, staying a little longer in that, and or once it's over, doing a ceremony around acknowledging who I am now after I went through the process of, what does this mean about me? What are my strengths? And then really connecting with those. Often there's learning, there's growth that happens in there. So there can be ceremony around that. There's a whole body of work called post traumatic growth. And there's lots of research, study, writing, et cetera, if you're interested. And the idea is that for some people, once we go through a traumatic experience, although people often say, I wouldn't have said that I wanted to go through that ever. And I don't know that I'd change it now, because at this point I have I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't know the things that I know now. I wouldn't have the gifts to give if I hadn't gone through that. And I want to have a lot of um, care around that, because that, like I said, not everybody has that experience. And obviously, there's so many factors that go into play with that. But when that happens, it is the term that is being used in this moment is post-traumatic growth. So can check that out more if you're interested. Okay, I'm just going to take a breath here. So I'm going to shift gears now into how do you, if you're interested in engaging with ceremony more, how do you create personally meaningful, culturally relevant ceremonies for yourself and or for your clients? And the first thing I want to say is it can be really, really simple. It can be so simple. And it doesn't need to be big fanfare. It can be spontaneous. It can be as spontaneous as lighting a candle in your room and saying a prayer, or speaking out loud your intention to yourself and to the universe or to the fire. So it can be very simple, spontaneous, and or it can be planned out. It can be very elaborate. And so I'm going to share with you some of the steps of creating ceremony. But I'm going to start and end by saying it can be really, really simple. So if you want to get more elaborate or experimental or experiential, there are a lot of pieces you can consider, steps you can go through. And again, you can also trust yourself and be spontaneous. So, we already talked about this. So common intentions for ceremony: letting go of old identities, beliefs, and behaviors. That would be the severance. Asking the universe for support or guidance, saying yes to entering a new phase of life. That would be the liminal. Celebrating a completion or stepping into a new way of being. Here's some images of ceremony: inside, outside, different ceremonial beings: fire, earth. This one up in the right-hand corner is a picture I took for an elemental ritual ceremony. So it has the different elements, feathers representing air, water, earth. So that's what this is here. Okay, so back to steps for creating ceremony. So I'm going to go through all of these in much more depth, but I wanted to give you the visual here. So first, get clear on the intention. This is super critical because that becomes the compass, the guidepost for everything you do. Then decide how you will open and close your intentional or sacred space. Third, decide what symbols or symbolic actions you would like to include in the ceremony. 4, consider incorporating some additional elements based on the client. So if you're creating this with a client, we're going to look at what are those additional elements here. Decide who or what will witness the ceremony: humans, the earth, spiritual beings, or otherwise, in person, from afar. And then decide when and where your client will do this, or you, if you're doing it for yourself. Okay, so we're going to go through all of these. So the first one, get clear on the intention. So I've spoke to this a few times, but again, this really is, like I said, the compass. It's as if you are pointing the nose of your boat in a particular direction, or pointing your compass and then following that. So the intention you set will impact what happens, will impact everything about the ceremony and beyond. So this is what guides what you do, what you create, the energy you're putting in motion. It's the seed that takes on a life trajectory all on its own. Okay. So the second one, decide how you will open and close intentional space to mark that something special is happening outside of the norm or the usual day to day. So it's marking something special's about to happen. It's calling our attention and our presence forward in a different way. And there are many ways that you can do this. And you can think about even cultures or communities or religions or different things that you've participated in or seen. Often um, we use sensory experiences. So that might be sound, song, rhythm, instruments, etc. It might be lighting something, lighting a candle, or burning something with smell. Again, it's calling our attention here. Potentially crossing a physical threshold. We enter into the ceremony, might be a part of the beginning or creating of intentional sacred space. It might be saying a prayer or offering gratitude or calling in spiritual support. There are so many ways to do that. And then with ending, often but not always, often we end in a similar way that we begin, which is called the thresholds of the beginning and the end. So if we began with sound or music, we might end that way. Or if we begin with a bow, we might end with a bow. Or there might be a slightly different action that happens on the backside to close the sacred space. Often gratitude is a part of that. And then third, decide what symbols or symbolic actions you would like to incorporate into the ceremony. And so symbolic items, it might be, what do you want to include that signifies comfort or support for your ceremony or meaning or the creation of sacred intentional space or something that represents what you're letting go of or calling in. So again, the symbolic things might be, I have this staff that was made for me by my uncle, and this is really important to me, and it's gone with me a lot of places, and he's someone that represents support, so I want this staff here. And what I'm doing is letting go, and so I'm bringing this old letter that I'm going to burn that represents what I'm letting go of. So the symbolic items can be for many different purposes. And then the symbolic actions. So that's really, what are the actions that you want to take to support what it is that you're marking? So again, are you letting go? Is it a severance ceremony? Do you want to bury something or burn something or shred something? What are you going to do that's going to represent that energetically in the physical realm? Or if you're in the liminal, if it's a ceremony of the liminal, how do you allow yourself to be in the question? So wander the land, holding the question. Speak to the trees or the fire about the question. See, what does the earth have to tell you about this? Speak to your community. Help. I need support. I need your support during this time. So what's the action? And then in terms of the incorporation phase, some actions you might take would be receiving something, a special award or badge or ring or crown or a piece of clothing or certificate, symbolizing, oh, this is who I am now. This is what I accomplished. Represents the work that I did, whatever that might be. It might be offering a gift to your community. It might be, this is what I learned. This is what I'm so grateful to have received during this time. And I want to offer something to you. I want to offer you a song. I want to offer you a gift, whatever that might be. So those are some examples. Again, we're going to go back through and get more even specific. So the next piece is additional supportive elements. Consider incorporating some of these based on really your beliefs if you're doing this and or your client's beliefs. So this may include, and some of this we've already been I've already been talking about, but prayers, poems, blessings, or spontaneous words. Is, is there a role for that in there? People often use readings when they do formal ceremonies or poems. Another one would be a calling in of support. So that's one way that you can begin a ceremony. And some people call in their ancestors or the unseen world, or call on the elements, earth, air, wind, fire, beyond. There are other elements that people use. Or you might call on the wisdom of the universe or the earth to witness, or imagine those humans in the world that you love and just call on their essence to support you. So that is an option. Also, the incorporation of the elements. I mentioned the elements, earth, air, wind, fire, and beyond. You might have those represented because they each represent a different aspect of wisdom, of power, of support. And often water may be used for cleansing. Um, Fire can be used for a lot of things, for power, for spirit, for transformation. So thinking about, do you want to incorporate any of those consciously in your actions and as part of the ceremony? Also, another um, relationship that some people have are with the directions of the north or the east, the south, the west, the earth, the above, the internal. And again, many different cultures have different associations with those. There might be other maps such as that that you or your clients connect with. Okay, so the last consideration, oh, it's not the last, the almost last consideration is decide who or what will witness the ceremony. Do you want humans to be there? Would you like any nature beings to be there? Do you want to be witnessed by the unseen world? Do you want a facilitator? Do you want to do it solo? Or does your client want to do this solo, right? Do you want to ask people who aren't there to hold space, to light a candle for you while you're doing this? There's so many different ways to do ceremony. Again, sometimes it's just spontaneous and we do it ourselves. Sometimes it's planned and we know we're going to do it ourselves, but we want to ask for support out there. Or sometimes we want people to witness us. And truly, community is a key piece of ceremony. Community, and I say that word very loosely, community, knowing that we are not alone. And for each of us, that's a different experience. For some of us, that means humans. We want to know we're not alone in the human world. For others of us, we feel very connected and held by the earth, by the earth or by the unseen world. And so how do we know that we're not alone? How do we allow ourselves to be witnessed? Because when we're witnessed, it also ups the ante in a way. It ups the power. It ups our own sense of accountability, that we're being seen in our intention. And if humans are involved, we can ask them to remind us or to ask us, how's that intention going? So many different ways. And then finally, decide when and where you'll do the ceremony. So I always say, once we decide we're doing it, the ceremony begins. The energies start aligning. I've had so many stories people share of, I set the intention, I went home, and this thing happened. A friend of mine recently said, set the intention, I'm going to be retiring this year. I came home the next day and I had an email that I was getting laid off. So I set this intention that I was going to be more generous and connect with more people. And I walked out my door and my neighbor needed my help. So the moment we decide we're doing it, things open up. The ceremony starts. Our being starts quickening a little bit as we orient toward the ceremony. Because if we're doing the ceremony right, typically we're stretching a little bit beyond our edge, stretching beyond our identity, to something bigger, something greater, something more expansive, something else, or something more focused. But because this is a little bit new, there's often some energy that gets stirred as we orient toward the ceremony. Okay, so I want to go back through those pieces and give you an example of one ceremony that I did with a client and what this looked like to help kind of ground these pieces and hopefully give you ideas of how you might do this with any intention. So, okay, first one, get clear on the intention. So I had a client, her intention, or she had we were working together and she had just experienced 4 years of major chronic illness. I met her right before this started happening, actually. So, 4 years of major chronic illness that impacted her work, her capacity to go outside of her home, she had part of this was chemical sensitivity. And so, after 4 years of impeccable self care, diet, energetic practices, physical practices, doing a variety of medical treatments, experimental medical treatments. She was back in the world. And obviously, this happened bit by bit by bit by bit over these 4 years. And so she was in my office one day talking about really recognizing, whoa, I have a job now. I can socialize now. I can stay up after past 7 p.m. these days. And was looking back and going, whoa, that was really intense. This was a really long time. And I started reflecting that back. I started reflecting back, you know, how different it is now than it was 2 years ago, and what a long stretch that was, and how hard that was, and that she made it through, and that she was in a different place, which doesn't always happen for everyone with chronic illness. And she just burst out crying with grief and relief. Here's an example of resource. When we have support, when we have care, often we just start feeling, start expressing. So she cried and she grieved and she just let herself feel how hard it had been and how much she had been through. And I said, do you know that you made it? I think, would you want to do a ceremony welcoming yourself back, welcoming yourself back from the illness, from the underworld, from this hard, hard time of, wandering in the desert? And she said, yes, I don't even know what to do, but, yes. And so we spent a lot of time working with all the details of what she wanted to do. And she did do ceremony in her life. So it wasn't a totally new concept. But we walked through, how do you want to do it? Who do you want to be there? What symbolic actions do you want? What symbolic items do you want? And so open and close sacred space. So we came to the day. She invited about 12 friends, I want to say 10 or 12 friends, and did it out on the where and when, did it out on a friend's land where there was privacy, there was connection with earth, there was also a place to gather afterwards to share food. And she set it, I'm jumping to the end here of where, when, but she set it for about 3 weeks out from that point, because she felt like, okay, that would be enough time to reach out to the people that I want to be there and invite them and, find the place to do it. She found the place to do it and begin to consider how I want to do this, what I want to do. So we made the decision that day. Okay, I'm going to do it in about 3 weeks. Here are the people I want to be there. This is the intention. And then kind of the rest followed. So when we got to the ceremony, the next piece, open and close sacred space. So she asked friends to play some rhythm, and then some rattles, some drums, different things that she had around. And then she called in the directions. That was something that she did as a practice in her life. So she called in the directions and support from the unseen world. She also had some local herbs that she asked me to light and do a blessing for her as she walked in and essentially crossed a threshold. Actually, we did that before, I think before she called in the directions. And then as she walked in, she asked us to all welcome her back as she walked in. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. You made it. And then skipping to the end, since we're talking about that in this moment, with the end, she released the directions. She had us do more rhythm as she walked out, and then walked out to a place on the land and sat in silence for a little bit apart from us, just to let it all really sink in to her cells and her bones that she was back and what just happened. And when she was ready, then came back to the community and we all shared food. So next piece, deciding what symbols or symbolic actions. So in terms of symbolic items, some of the things that she had was sorry, one was a piece of art that she had made while she was sick that represented that long time of the not knowing what was going to happen, the long time of the liminal. She also had a statue of a goddess that she felt connected to in her spiritual practice that was in her space for the last many years. And she felt helped support her in staying connected to a sense of strength, sense of hope in her time going through all of this. And then she also had asked friends and loved ones who couldn't be there if they would write words of support for her. So she had gathered those and also brought those. And then in terms of the symbolic actions, and some of this I've shared already, was one was having her friends welcome her back. And then with that, she shared some of the story. That was some of the action. She shared some of the story and asked us to listen and to witness what this was like for her in some of the most significant times or challenging moments, as well as good moments of the journey. And she burned the art. So there was a fire, and she burned the art as a representation of really the letting go of the liminal, letting go of that deep, dark space that she didn't know if she was ever going to return from. She also spoke to what got her through, what were the people, what were the experiences that helped her when she was at her darkest times. She shared what she was bringing with her from the journey, what she had learned, what she knew now that she didn't know before. And she had me place a colored shawl on her shoulders to represent health and wholeness at the end. This is where I am now. This is what I'm stepping into, and I'm not taking this for granted. I'm never one more day taking my health for granted when I have it, because I know what it's like to not have, and I know that that is also possible again. Yeah, and then again, the walking out, and I shared that piece. So additional supportive elements, again, spoke to some of this. She included fire. She included some spontaneous prayer. Oh, and words from others, did a spontaneous allowing others to reflect back what they remember of her journey, when those that knew her, of what they see now, about what's different. It's really touching. And then also the rhythm instruments. So doing the creating the space with the rhythm instruments and the smoke, and also the calling in of the directions. And then the who witnessed. So there were those that witnessed from afar, that wrote words and thought of her as this was happening. There were the earth beings. She wanted to do it on the earth and call in the directions. She was calling in the witness of that, as well as other beings in the spirit world. And then she also, had her community witnessing and really told us how to support her, what to do. And so, in a way, it was facilitated by the community. She kind of set it up ahead of time. This is how I want it to go. This is what I want you to do. This is what I'm going to do. I had a role. And then it was, as ceremony often is, there's the structure and then there's the spontaneity. So we had a sense of here's how it can go, here's kind of the intentions, the actions, and then room for inspiration, for people to speak or to say, wait, she said, I think I need to do this other piece first. Okay, so we'll just take a few breaths with that and just notice what's present in you in this moment, just in hearing all of this. And just note you may have had personal pieces touched as you listened, or ahas or inspirations, and trusting all of that. Okay, so a final few notes here as we're coming toward the end. A couple notes for you as practitioners if you are supporting clients in creating ceremony, marking meaningful transitions, or traumatic experiences in life. So it's a good idea first to do ceremony yourself first. So if this is something that is newer for you or you haven't practiced, really begin doing it for yourself, because there's a comfortability I've found in trusting the process, trusting the spontaneity, trusting that ceremony even can be simple, can be very simple. I think often if we haven't done ceremony, or depending on the communities we've done ceremony in, we can think, oh, it needs to be really big and lots of fanfare. And that is one way to do ceremony, but it's only one way. There's so many other ways. So you can trust dropping into the flow, dropping into the listening. It is a very particular space that might actually be quiet. It might be simple, or it might be loud and bigger energy, but that both are valid. And what's really the most important is that it's authentic to the meaning, to your soul, to what you're doing here. And then also consider your own personal, cultural, or spiritual beliefs, as well as how that might be similar or different to your client's spiritual or cultural beliefs. And so really considering, how do you offer this and how do you help someone create a ceremony and or facilitate it so that it is really meaningful for them, that you're not putting something on them. And so some of the questions or considerations here that you might hold or ask are, let's see. So first of all, are they interested? Are they interested in doing a ceremony? And if they say yes, you might, then you want to ask, what are their associations with those terms? Is this something they've done? What does it mean to them? I get all different answers when I've asked people if they want to do a ceremony. Where I live, people, it's more common, I would say, in Boulder, in particular, Colorado. So people either often say yes, and or I don't know, tell me more. And I would say, so I'll share, what I've shared with you. This is simply what ceremony is. This is what ritual is. It's really about marking, and we can do that in a very simple way or in a more drawn out way. And so again, if they say yes, then looking at what are their associations and what are their experiences with ceremony and ritual. Have they created it in the past? Are they comfortable with it? Are they someone that does it spontaneously? Or says, I know exactly what I want to do. I know what I want to be there. Or do they need ideas? Like, this is what it could look like. It sounds like it's about letting go. Here are symbolic ways of letting go. So you might give ideas and then look at, if they say yes, how much support they would want from you to create and or enact it. So do they want you holding their hand every step of the way, facilitating the process of the creating it and the facilitating it? Do they take the idea and run with it, or anywhere in between? Often with clients I work with, typically it's some kind of flow with that, where I'll give ideas and then I'll send them home to think about it or journal about it, journal about these aspects of the ceremony. What are the objects they want to have there? What are the actions? And then have them come back and share with me what arose. And then I might give them reflection or ideas to fill out some of those pieces or ask them more clarifying questions. And then also consider with them, do they want to do it alone? Do they want to be witnessed? Do they want it facilitated? I've had people do it all of those ways. One client went out and did her own ceremony, but asked all her friends for words of support and read them while she was on the ceremony. I had people create a ceremony and then ask their partner to be the one with them to do it. And or I facilitated a lot of different um, ceremonies as well. Okay. So as we're coming to the end, I want to reiterate, come back to where we started, which is with all of this, know that it can be really simple. It can be really simple. It can be spontaneous, or it can be elaborate. And depending on the situation and your comfortability with this, it can look so many different ways. And just to remember, the key is the intention. Let the intention guide the way, and let your or your client's inner knowing guide the way more than any plan or any should. To be in the moment, to be spontaneous, to be connected to the intention. And as we are coming to the end, I'll just share my information. Thank you so much. So good to be with you here. And if you have any interest in finding more about my work at the Somatic Wilderness Therapy Institute, there's my contact information. And I also do a 9-month rites of passage and ceremony training with a colleague from Australia. And that's our website, the ritesofpassagetraining.com. So feel free to be in touch or look me up, and sending you many good wishes, many blessings as you potentially do ceremony and incorporate nature, incorporate resourcing in your work in the world. May this ripple far out. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.